I am Jay Wilson. I'm the lead designer of Diablo 3, and these are my very, very close friends. Leonard Boyarsky, lead world designer, Brian Morrisroe, our art director, and Julian Love, who is our lead technical artist. Today we're going to take you through how we design characters for Diablo 3. We're going to focus mostly on character classes, but a little bit on monsters as well. And this is pretty much going to be a cross-discipline type of panel. Essentially, we're going to do design, story and lore, and art. So we're going to take you kind of through our entire pipeline of how we do that. So we're going to be jumping back and forth between a bunch of us as we go through the slides. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce, as I said, Leonard, and he's going to start talking about how we develop story for our player classes.
The first thing we wanted to do is look at the history and character backgrounds. We wanted really unique characters, and to do this, we wanted our characters to have well-defined personalities as well as character arcs and basically their own feel. Now, this is reflected in the skill system, or their personal skills that Jay is going to talk about, but we set out to create archetypes. When you're playing a barbarian, you want to feel like you're playing the powerful fighter from the way he talks to the skills he has. Also, the NPCs in the game, the non-player characters, will react to the classes differently. The barbarians are a fairly well-known race of people, though they are 8 feet tall and about 300 pounds of pure muscle, which can be intimidating. And the witch doctors are from a tribe that's very remote and not a lot of people know about them, and so they're very kind of strange to people. They're not quite sure what to make of them. So the NPCs will react to them differently, and that will add a different flavor to your playing experience, which will hopefully bring you into the story more and bring you into the game more. And that's not to say we're going to have more story than the previous games. We like to think of it as deeper and more fulfilling. We're not going to have a longer presentation. There's not going to be huge dialogue trees. We're just doing a more concise, better presentation, we believe. So, interesting characterization adds weight to the story. When we flesh out these characters and give them a backstory, it makes them much more interesting than, say, your off-the-shelf fighter. The barbarian is the same barbarian that you played in Diablo 2. But it's 20 years later. He's seen a lot. He's gone through a lot. Finding out what these things are, where he's at in his life, what has happened to his people at the end of Lord of Destruction. Mount Arreat was destroyed. That's where the barbarian's ancestral home is. We have lore about the different classes that we've introduced so far up on the website that goes deeper into these things. But we're just trying to make the point that we're personalizing these characters. They're not generic. They're not an empty void in the middle of the story. We've really tried to help make the character a central part of the story by giving him a stake in it. The different classes have different reasons for being where they are at the beginning of the story. They have different reasons for becoming involved in the story. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Jay.
After we've kind of developed a basic background for a character, especially a class, what we do on the design side is try to come up with a series of defining traits, abilities, and things that those characters will use. So, and those are really we're not at the point where we're designing skills or anything like that. We're just trying to get the broad strokes. What's this character about? So we have a couple of just design philosophies we follow at this stage. They're not necessarily even unique to us. They're something that is just kind of Blizzard design philosophy that we share across the teams. So I'm going to go through a few of those now. The first one's concentrated coolness. And the idea of this is that every class needs to have its own thing that makes it cool, and that needs to be unique to them. It's what makes an archetype. It's what makes a character really sing. It makes them really awesome. The Barbarian's a great example. He's this pure physical melee fighter. And you could have other fighters as other classes, but you wouldn't want any of them that have his tone. You wouldn't want any of them that have his brute strength, because that's really what defines him. So getting those kind of key things and saying, well, and for the Barbarian, it was, you know, he's just an unstoppable sheer physical force. So that was kind of his concentrated, cool idea. The next one is putting together a series of defining traits. And these are basically just examples of the kinds of things that they could do. So you could say a particular class like the Witch Doctor, well, he raises zombies and he plays around with diseases and plagues and he likes to control people's minds. So these are kind of what we call defining traits. These are basically just to kind of get people's imagination going on these characters so that if we're not excited about them, then they're not going to be cool. And that's a lot of how we make the decisions about what characters we're going to do is what we're excited about. So, and then the last one is, we ask ourselves, are these things really awesome? Are they really cool? Are we talking, when we talk about skills for a character class, are we saying, well, we can have a skill where you do like 1% extra critical damage? It's like, oh, well, that's not very exciting. I mean, it's got its point within an overall kind of character build system, but if that's what you're defining your character by, well, that's not a really awesome character. But if we say, oh, well, he hits the ground so hard that everything in front of him gets completely crushed by the seismic force, that's pretty awesome. So those are the kinds of things that we look for the characters. And it's funny because when you talk about them in a panel, they almost seem obvious, but it's really easy when you get in a team to get caught into those nitty-gritty details of like, well, what kind of attributes is this guy going to have, or things like that. And it's always important to remember you start with something really awesome actions and defining traits. So now I'm going to pass it to Brian.
Thank you, Jay.
He knows better than me.
I got the script right in front of me. It's fine. So basically, as art director, my job is to kind of help our creative artists take all that information that Jay and Leonard just went through, with the story, the background, what we're trying to accomplish with the gameplay design, and really bring that to visual life. That's kind of our job. So, when Jay was talking about awesome action and things like that, it's our job to actually make that visually appealing and actually happen. So in order to do that for Diablo 3, one of the main things that we wanted to do was actually start back at the beginning and really take a good hard look at what this franchise was all about and what made it such a classic gameplay experience. So we started with the original Diablo, and you can see the 3 original classes up there. And we took a look at some of our early concept designs for that and kind of defined what made those awesome at the time and why they became kind of a timeless set of characters. And what you can't really see on these concepts here, but one interesting thing that we were noticing when we were analyzing these old drawings and the old characters and stuff was just the dark nature with which they were created. A lot of their armor is very sharp. There's a lot of history to them. In fact, the wizard in this example, if I had the full sketch up there, you could see that his feet are actually pierced with very large bones. And that's really what kind of inspired us when we were talking about how we wanted to approach our hero classes moving forward. Was, what kind of a world do you live in where you pierce the bottom of your feet? That's got to be the most harsh, engaging world that you could possibly imagine to live in. But that's the world that our hero classes were kind of existing in. And the other thing you start to wonder about is, well, what kind of a background does a guy like that have? They look a little bit sketchy, like a rogue. The wizard doesn't look too happy. These guys live in a sort of a morally gray area, and that's really something that inspiration-wise, we kind of latched onto as a character team. So moving forward into Diablo 2, again, we kind of took those more mature themes in the character realm. Here are the hero classes you can see. And in Diablo 2, we kind of expanded on that. So with the Diablo 1 heroes, we had some morally gray characters. Well, in Diablo 2, what you see with the Necromancer and the Assassin, those names right there are downright mean. In some cases, those could actually be enemies in a game, not just a hero class. And so that's really what we loved to think about was, this universe is extremely harsh. This is a place that if you're walking down the street, you have the chance to run into a demon or a character or a creature that could kill you at any instant. What kind of a hero is going to exist in those worlds? So from a philosophical standpoint, that's where we started. That's the inspiration that we wanted to start with, was just that dark overtone of the universe. So that brings us to kind of how we approached the Diablo 3 design. You can see we have some concepts of the barbarian. And this is actually the barbarian from the Diablo II universe. He's the same character. And you can see that we're keeping a lot of those same philosophies. The sharp armor, I mean, if this guy moves in the wrong way, he's going to impale himself, you know, but that's just extra protection for the harsh environment that these guys live in. You know, this is just the day-to-day life that these guys have to lead. So talking about the barbarian specifically and updating a classic, you know, this was really exciting for us. This was an opportunity to take just a classic character that we all love to play and just bring him back to life. You know, I mean, what's this dude been up to for the last 20 years? As Leonard was saying, this guy's 8 feet tall, 300 pounds of pure muscle. You know, and he saw some stuff in Diablo 2 that, you know, would kill most people. So, you know, giving him a little bit of age, kind of graying his hair down, making him look a little more matted. And then he's got these big gnarly scars on him and all sorts of craziness going on like that. So for us, when we were talking with Leonard and what Jay wanted to accomplish from the design side, we kind of pulled all that stuff together with, you know, what we wanted to accomplish by selling the story visually. And it's those scars, it's that gray hair, it's how that armor, you know, kind of lands on his body, things like that, that really help us tell the story visually. And then the Witch Doctor. So this is our brand new class that we're really excited to announce here. And for Diablo 3, you know, like I was saying, the heroes are a little bit of a morally gray kind of area from a visual standpoint. We wanted them to be that guy that you're not quite sure if you like him or not. You're not quite sure if he's a happy guy, if he's nice or whatever. So the Witch Doctor for us is really where we went to town. Like, this guy is basically just a grizzled old, you know, vet. He's been out there. He's been through so many battles. He is just an old man. He's hunched over. You know, he is a great example of a contrast to the barbarian. He's old and frail. This guy is not going to go out there and start smashing dudes over the head with a hammer. You know, what this guy is all about, he's learned the tricks. He's been there. He's been hit in the head. He knows he doesn't like it. So what he does is he goes out there and he says, hey man, I'm just going to mess with their heads from now on. And he starts throwing powders in their face. He starts messing with people's minds so they fight against each other. He summons zombie hordes to fight for himself. And so when we approach this guy, I mean, what kind of a character do you have to be in order to summon a wall of zombies for you? You know, like, that's what we want. Like, that's his driving force is, I'm protected by the undead, right? But he needed to be different enough from the old classes in, like, the Necromancer from Diablo 2 and give him a fresh take. So visually, you know, he's much more stunning. He's just this big, vibrant plumes of feathers to scare off his enemies. His face mask is designed in a way to actually be very dark and brooding looking. You know, even though he's this frail old man underneath, when you see him for the first time, he actually presents this massive kind of structure in front of you because of the extra plumage on his face mask, because of the dark look on the face of the mask. And that's really kind of what he's all about, is just messing with your mind so that he doesn't get hit physically.
All right. Thank you, Brian. One of the things we decided to do in Diablo 3 that's different from, a little bit different from Diablo 2 and the first Diablo game is we expanded their voice. And in the first two games, they had limited voice. They would tell you when your inventory is full. They might comment on a situation or, you know, say, you know, rest in peace when they put a soul down. But since we were going with very specific individuals with specific personalities, we felt that the best way to represent that was to define them through their voices, to give them very identifiable voices that really kind of drive who they are as characters. And that helps reinforce their personalities and can change over their character arc as well, is another aid to helping us tell the story. Now, and another thing you saw on the demo yesterday was that we have a new conversation system. In the previous games, it was all monologues. And our little equation here is conversations are better than monologues, and monologues are longer. Even if it's the same number of words, a monologue can feel twice as long. It's not the best way to get information to have somebody just talk at you. It's a much quicker, easier, more entertaining device to have a conversation where your character comes to the table knowing certain things, maybe the player doesn't know, but things that can be revealed through a conversation. It's much more interesting. It gives you a sense of discovering things as a player. We can also give your player a history that your character a history that the player doesn't necessarily have to know about, that can be discovered throughout the game. This way, we can create backgrounds for your characters. Characters from your people from your character's past can come back to haunt him. We can bring in class quests that could be very interesting. Each class will have different views of the story, which will be played out through these conversations, and it just basically makes it more interesting. I think the bottom line beyond all this is it really gives us a way to put the hero that you're playing at the center of the story. Your hero can drive the story as opposed to being an errand boy. You can decide what is the best thing to do. The villagers can be cowardly and not say, you need to go fight this. You could suggest, we need to go fight this. We need to do this. I need to take this situation under control because no one else can take care of it. It really puts you at the center of the action and gives you a decisive role in that. And I think that's what's going to make the character more of a hero feel. And with that, we go to Jay Wilson, I believe.
No, that would be me. We did rehearse, I promise. There's a lot of slides. We forget what order they come in. So what I'm going to talk now is the next step in creating a character class, which is what we call signature skills. And essentially, signature skills are where we bring the design and the art together. So we focus on a small set of skills. We pick something really cool to work on, and basically focusing on defining what that character is all about. Now, when we start working on a character and coming up with skills, it's really easy to come up with, we probably sit in a room and come up with 100 skills. Coming up with ideas for them is not hard. But we don't decide we're going to make 100 skills. We decide, okay, well, what's one that's really cool and really defining for us? So we pick the one that we like the most, that we think is the most descriptive of those characters, and that's the skill we go with. When we do that, it's really important. We have kind of one of our sayings, which is on the slide, which is don't balance too soon. The goal here is not to create a skill that we feel is going to make for really balanced, fair gameplay. The point of this is to make a skill that is going to make people go, whoa, that was really awesome. And sometimes really awesome is easily edited when you're talking too much about balance too soon. And I don't mean to trivialize balance. Balance is really important, and we've always placed a lot of importance on balance, but it comes at a certain phase, and the beginning is not where it comes. At the beginning, you're just trying to make every single hero as awesome as you can possibly do. One of the things that actually, kind of a cool thing that happens is as we work on each new hero, we have a little bit of an arms race where the next hero is even slightly more awesome, so then we go back and make the first hero even a little more awesome. So that's kind of a fun back and forth, but it just makes the characters better and better over time. So focusing on a couple of these signature skills, the first one is the Barbarian. Seismic Slam. This is basically a skill where the Barbarian raises a weapon above his head, slams it on the ground, and essentially anything in kind of a cone in front of him gets just kind of rocked and destroyed. So this skill was the very first skill we actually made for the Barbarian, and probably one of the first skills we made for the entire game. It took a lot longer to make this skill than it takes to make most skills. We did a lot of iteration in the animation department in particular, because trying to make the Barbarian feel physically powerful, generally we associate kind of big, bold movements with physical power, but if you want a game that plays really fast and feels responsive, you want the movements to be really fast. And so getting that balance of fast movements with really but a powerful feel was a big challenge, and we had to try a bunch of different ways that we can animate it to get that right. So once we did that, got through kind of all that iteration, what was funny was we really didn't like the skill for most of the time. We got the programming done on it, and I don't know, it doesn't seem that great. We got effects on it, and the effects were really cool, but somehow it just didn't sing to us. It wasn't until we actually got sound on the skill that we finally went, wow, this skill's really awesome. This is really fun. And the key to that, I think, is that it takes a lot of faith to get through this process. But once you do get through that process, all the skills that come after that come much quicker because everyone looks and goes, oh, what is a barbarian about? Well, freaking look at Seismic Slam. He rocks the world with like great physical power. And the next 4 or 5 skills we did for the barbarian almost required no communication between design and art because art already knew what the barbarian was all about and design already knew what we were designing for. We had a great skill that acted as an example. So the next one I want to talk about is Witch Doctor, Firebomb, which went through kind of an interesting evolution. One of the first skills we did for the Witch Doctor, and originally it was more like a fireball spell. So when you cast it, you cast it in a direct line from the Witch Doctor to your target. So it would pretty much anything got in the way, it would hit that and it would explode. And we figured that'd be cool because explosions are cool. Everybody likes explosions. Does everybody here like explosions? Yeah? Yeah. I like explosions. I figured you would. So the problem was, it wasn't really a problem. I mean, it's a cool skill, but we've all seen it. And what the artist came back and said was, well, we didn't really imagine the Witch Doctor like this guy. We imagined him actually with his magic being more physical. So we thought maybe he would be concocting some kind of crazy magical alchemical thing, stick it inside a skull, and that would be the bomb. That would be what would explode. And once it was a physical projectile, which designers thought, well, that sounds really cool, let's do that. But once it was a physical projectile, we didn't want it to travel in a straight line anymore. We wanted to have it thrown like a projectile. So it became an arcing projectile. It could be thrown over walls, but that really changes the gameplay a lot. You have to be a little more predictive with its location, but it's got some advantages in that you can avoid obstacles and hit the exact target you want. It's a great example of how art and design can work together to iterate really well to make a very original, very cool skill. And the last thing we did was the artist really wanted to put this image of the Witch Doctor into the fire effect, and I think you could see it a little bit there, but basically when the fire goes off, it's like this big kind of form of his hands and face, and we just thought that was so cool. We actually did it with a lot of other skills. The Horrify skill, a Mass Confuse, and again, it just kind of shows how that one first skill can inform a whole class. So to kind of sum up, this is essentially how we develop skills. We just kind of rinse and repeat this idea. The first few are, really take some time. They're really hard to do, but after that, the rest come much, much easier and makes for a really cool character. So I believe I'm passing to Julian now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about special effects for Diablo III and some of the thinking that went into the things that you've seen in the demo. So right at the beginning, we adopted some overriding goals, sort of fundamental philosophies that we wanted to follow when we were creating the graphics for these things. And so I'm going to give you a description of what they were. The first one was that the players, that the Diablo 3 is a highly visceral experience where players experience brutal combat and wield godlike power. And the other one was that characters should do crazy things, express more personality and more backstory than past Diablo games. And so the goal of special effects in doing that is to punch these things up really loudly and to do what the characters and maybe the backgrounds and even the design couldn't do by itself. So with this whole godlike power notion in mind, let's jump ahead and take a look at what we've done for some of the player skills. So what we do when we want to start working on these graphics for the skills is we take all this information that we can get from design and from the concept departments and even from ourselves as effects artists, and we just sort of start bouncing the idea of the skill back and forth verbally, and we try to actually top each other up a little bit, try to one-up one another. Like, who can come up with the most crazy description of this thing that says what it is but reinforces what that character is about? So, for instance, we might, when talking about the barbarian, we would say things like, when he leaps, he lands with the force of a small bomb, or when he charges, he breaks the sound barrier. When he can hit the ground so hard, he causes seismic explosions. So you can see that those things are really physically oriented descriptions. And from there, we would go on to actually make the graphics. But we did even more for the barb. We added this ability of his to tap into his own lineage through the power of the Ancients, whom you may remember from Diablo II expansion. And so he has this other skill called Hammer of the Ancients, which is where he sort of wields this giant like god hammer, which at first seemed kind of mystical to us, but the bottom line there is that he's still swinging like this gigantic hammer, which is a really physical thing to be doing. So it works out. So on the flip side, for the Witch Doctor, obviously we wanted to get a really rich voodoo vibe.
Hit it one more.
One more. But we wanted to avoid that straight-up magic caster feel, where he's not just conjuring things out of thin air. So witch doctors just don't channel magic. They take real-world objects and infuse them with sort of a voodoo magic. So going back to that description, that verbal descriptive method, we would say things like, okay, he's gonna throw a shrunken head filled with some kind of alchemical cocktail. He's gonna create swarms of locusts by blowing on voodoo dust from his palm. Or he's gonna sprinkle dust in the air and cause illusions that frighten monsters away. And of course, you're not a witch doctor unless you're doing something with zombies. Zombies, witch doctors, they go together. But here we didn't want to just do straight-up zombies, you know, the kind of slow wandering around humanoid zombies. We wanted something with a twist. So we got that by basically taking normal concepts and then just sort of smashing them in together with the idea of zombies. And so when we had this idea of doing a skill like kind of like Firewall, we sort of twisted that with zombies, and that's how we came up with Zombie Wall. And then other ideas were a little bit more straightforward. So we got this idea that, you know, if a man's best friend is a dog, then a witch doctor's best friend is sort of this zombie dog thing, which is what became the mongrel. And the only thing better than a zombie dog would be an exploding zombie dog, so we blew them up. So that kind of takes care of our godlike power. But the other side of our brutal combat equation is that if heroes need crazy effects to punch up their personality, that monsters also need really insane impact effects as well. So to start off, we focused on just impacts alone. You're going to hit monsters a lot in this game, and you're going to see a lot of blood because of that. And we didn't want the blood to get too monotonous, so we started out by just making a ton of different kind of blood sprays. And then Diablo is a game where there's all sorts of kinds of damage, and you need to be able to get an idea when you're hitting somebody which kind of damage is actually happening on that monster. So we made different impact effects for each of the damages. We have, at this point, fire, cold, lightning, poison, and a new kind of damage called arcane. But we took it a little bit farther in that critical hits are a much bigger deal in Diablo III than in past games. So what we did there was we took all of those hit effects that we had, and we just made really much louder versions of each of them to kind of highlight that when those events are happening. So with all that hitting happening, you know, you're going to be killing a lot of monsters as well. So we really wanted to pump up the player's sense of impact on monsters. So in Diablo 3, the majority of monsters die using ragdoll physics. And we really like this because it allows the player to really interact with the monsters when you kill them. Depending on what kind of damage or the force that you're hitting them with, they're going to die in a different way. And then you can kind of set up little circumstances where you can like knock them off of ledges or make them go flying. But also, because there's all these different damage types in the game, we also wanted monsters that die from different types of damage to have a sort of elemental flavored death. So if you hit them with fire, they don't just play their ragdoll death, they play like a fiery ragdoll death or a poisony ragdoll death or lightning. And since we're making a big deal about critical hits, we also wanted to make a really big deal about critical deaths. So when you hit a monster with critical damage and you kill him, they literally explode. Now, you may have noticed that a lot of things in this game are exploding. And there's a really good reason for that. And it kind of comes from a really complicated formula that we developed on our own to sort of guide us through the process of like when should something explode, when shouldn't explode, and how does that work. And so I'm going to get that Here we go. So this equation is monster plus explosion equals awesome. And you may not be able to tell. Awesome was being represented by Ted Nugent there. all those elemental deaths and critical deaths are really cool, a lot of fun. But one of the things about Diablo II that really made it cool was that all of the characters had their own sort of special, like, custom death that they would play. And that brought a lot of personality to the monsters in Diablo II. So we wanted to have some of that as well. So what we did is we sort of reserved some monsters for what we call special deaths. And they're custom deaths that are built just like the ones in Diablo II. And what we do for those is we look into the character's core vibe. You know, what is this monster all about? And we pick something from that, and we try to punch that up. So special deaths are a really good example of our second overriding goal, which was reinforcing monster personality and bringing that to the forefront. But the other way that we emphasize the monster's character and personality is we have to look at the monster across a whole. How do they get on screen? What do they do? And of course, eventually, how do they die? So one of the things that we do is we look at that monster and we say, well, you know, he's got to get on screen in a really cool way. So one of the things that we did with these we went to the 1,000-pounder here on screen. We said his vibe is he's all about hell, and he gets summoned in literally piece by piece. So when he gets on screen, we figure, well, he's from hell, you know, he should be pretty mad, and he's really big. So we want to express a lot of anger, and part of his gameplay is that he gets really mad when when you almost kill him, and he throws this big temper tantrum, and then he changes the way he plays. And so we wanted to change also the way which of course means that you've got to change the way you play him. So we wanted to make that really loud. So what we did is we changed the way he looked, we gave him glowing tattoos, we changed his attack animations, we changed all the special effects. And then of course, when you finally do get the chance to kill him, he does sort of a reverse of how he got summoned in, because we wanted to echo, well, how did he get in on screen? Let's sort of do a reverse of that, and that'll really show off like this whole idea that he was summoned from hell. And that's just a taste of some of the special effects that we have in Diablo III. And next up is Jay, who'll be talking about monster creation.
All right, well, I kind of wish I had more video on my slides. Press the FX artist to bring all the cool stuff.
Your clicker there, Jay.
Oh, my clicker. So Julian's told you all kinds of cool things about how we kill the crap out of monsters. What I'm going to talk about is how we go through the process of creating them in the first place. There's actually a lot of different places monsters come from. This list of kind of bullet points is actually not a chronological list. It's more just like this is where what happens. Some monsters come from visual concepts. You know, the artists have a cool idea for something they want to see. Hey, we want a big giant dude who's super fat, he blows up and spits crazy eels out of him. Okay, that sounds pretty cool. Go. Designers are like, oh, we want a guy who has this really charged up, powerful attack, so that but when it hits the ground, it gets stuck, and so you get a chance to retaliate against him. And so the artists go, okay, we can come up with a cool visual for that guy. Sometimes it's this area needs goatmen in it because that's the kind of area that it is according to the lore and the history, and so that's a case where a monster or request comes from lore. So all these departments kind of feed off one another, and we all kind of pass around ideas until we come up with an initial list of kind of the creatures that we're going to create. So after we do that, we have what we call it a what do they do, how do they die meeting. It's just kind of it sounds snappy, so that's what we call them. But essentially, we get the designers and the artists together who are going to be working on a creature, and we talk about that creature and what we want out of them. And we ask 3 key questions. The first one is, how does the creature appear? The second one is, what do they do? And the last one is, how do they die? Now, when we started, we used to kind of say, oh, well, we used to spend a lot of time on what they do, but as we've spent more time developing, we've learned that how they appear and how they die are, if not just as important, sometimes even more important. A lot of creatures show up and die, and that's all they do, and they do it a lot. They show up, and then a couple seconds later, they get crushed. So that has to be really cool. It has to be really visceral, and that's one of the reasons why we came up with this really elaborate kill system, is so that every time you kill a monster, it's really cool, and a lot of times it's really different and changes and is really dynamic. And then how they appear has to be really important. The ghouls can't just walk off screen, walk on, on screen from the side. They've got to climb up walls, and the 1,000-pounder has to be summoned and come together. The triune vessel, which is that big. Okay, that big demonic, guy, the cultist who transforms into the demon. Those guys are, the way they appear is really cool, and that actually incited some gameplay. So those things are really important, and that's what these meetings are all about. What we usually come out of these is with a perfect picture of what we want the creature to be, going from art to design and back and forth. And so it's a great way for us to kind of come on the same page with a monster. I'm going to pass it over to Brian.
So, as Jay was saying, that's kind of where we start. How's this dude born? More importantly, how does he die? And in the in-between stage, that's kind of our job from a visual standpoint, is to try and make him read as best as possible for the 5 seconds that this character lives. And so really that's kind of where we start. We take all the design goals that they want. It's a very similar process to our hero creation process. We talk with story and what Leonard and his guys want to accomplish out of the history of where these creatures come from. And we take all that information and add the design of, is it a melee creature? Is it a casting creature? What kind of activity is this thing going to do on screen? And then we think to ourselves, okay, well, if our hero classes are this morally gray, I'm not sure if I really like them, they kind of look like bad dudes already type of guys, then just imagine what our enemies are going to look like. They need to look even worse, right? And this is kind of, for us, one of the most enjoyable aspects, because it's just crazy fun to come up with really weird creatures. I mean, we just basically reach into the depths of our deepest, darkest depths of our imagination and just spew out whatever we can think of. And it's usually probably what design and story was looking for, just the most mutated, nasty-looking, demonic thing, tasteful, of course, that you can possibly think of. So once we've gotten them into the stage of character concept modeling and stuff like that, we take it into our animation department, who are probably some of the most talented guys I've ever worked with, simply because, well, a lot of the creatures that we come up with aren't your typical, like, anatomically correct creatures. They've got weird arms coming out of their heads sometimes. Their feet are where their eyeballs should be. Who knows exactly what's going to happen? But you got to make these guys animate and have them be believable in their own world. And so before we head into the Q&A session here, we'll just give you a quick glimpse of kind of some of our animations of all the characters in the real world, or in the world of Diablo 3 here. With that, I think we're going to start opening it up for Q&A.
Hi, I just want to know if you're going to make sort of small variations in the monsters, so they're not all identical, and it kind of sort of more immersion and slightly more interested in killing the same thing hundreds and hundreds of times.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry. If you're going to make small variations in the appearance of the monsters to improve the immersion.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the main goals is obviously to make this game as visually interesting as possible. And I'll talk about the art perspective. I don't know if Jay wants to chime in on what the design perspective is on making creatures diverse. But on the art side, it's we find it visually appealing if we can get the same creature to maybe have a couple of different looks depending on where in the world that they live. It helps support that backstory, breaks up the monotony of killing the same colored creature all the time. So absolutely, it's definitely a focus that we want to do or approach on the art side.
That's a good answer.
All right. I was going to say it helps with the design because you can pick out creatures as well. But
yeah.
Whatever.
Well, see, he knows more about design than I do.
There you go.
Do you think you'll do anything to allow us to repick our skills?
Respec skills?
Yes.
We haven't made a decision on respecing yet. We haven't actually gotten to the point where we've even nailed down a skill system. But I will say that I think respecing is pretty awesome. And that's all I'm going to say on that.
Hello. I know we haven't really talked about items yet, but I wanted to ask a question. In Diablo 2, every particular unique item had its own look on a character, and as all the people would choose the better gear, all the characters ended up looking quite the same. So I wanted to ask if the player would have, in Diablo 3, the option of customizing his gear without having to choose weaker items, because in Diablo 2, if you want to have a character that does not look the same as everyone, you have to choose weaker gear.
So obviously one of our core philosophies while developing Diablo 3 is to maintain kind of what made the Diablo series such a classic, and obviously the loot system is a big deal. And so from an art standpoint, what we're really trying to accomplish is at every stage, at every level of armor collection, whether you're at the low end or the high end, there will be some diversity within that range. To the extent at which we're going to be doing that, we're not quite sure yet. It's still a system that we're exploring, but it is definitely something that we're working on in terms of getting visual diversity throughout the sets.
Yeah, what I will, from the design side, add to that, you really have one of two choices when you're addressing this particular issue. You can either have your items be more status driven, in which case you don't allow customization, or you can have customization, but then your items are not really going to be status driven nearly as much. We really feel that the status driven model, which is the Diablo 1 model, Diablo 2 model, is the better model for this game. Not saying that it's bad to have item customization, but visual customization of the items is not something that we're planning for those reasons. However, as Brian said, we expect a lot more diversity in the items and in the look of them. And one of the things that if you watch the video, you'll probably notice is, unlike Diablo 2, the items affect the look of the slot they're put on. So it's not, in Diablo 2, really only the chest pieces and the helmets and the weapons change the look of the character. Now boots, gloves, shoulder pads, which we did add. We added pants, so you won't have to run around pantsless. So I'm probably killing the translator, so I'll just stop talking now.
That's my job.
The monsters and laws that have been established in Diablo 2 and in the franchises like D&D, will you be following them or will you be totally discarding them?
I'm sorry, I didn't
in
understand the question.
Dungeons and Dragons, you had the Diablo 2 franchise where lore had been set and stuff. Would they be followed in Diablo 3?
Oh, well, we follow lore from the Dungeons and Dragons guidebook from the...
For the Diablo expansion.
You know, do you know the answer to that?
Are you talking from a history standpoint or from a stats standpoint?
From a history.
I'm not fully familiar with that, and I don't know how it links up with our official lore. We are keeping as much of our official lore as everyone has heard. We might put a different spin on it. If we go a totally different direction with some lore, we will give a very good reason for it. We won't just change it and act like it was different all along. But I can't speak to how the D&D stuff was, because I'm not sure how much of that was interpretive and how much was actual our lore. So, but in terms of what you know from us, we're going to definitely respect it and continue on and not just throw it all out and start over.
Hello. I don't know if this critical question has already been asked, but here it is. Will there be a core level?
Will there be a cow level?
Cow level.
Actually,
will
I
there
have
be a
been asked
top
that
secret?
before.
Yeah, we have been. Have we been asked that? I've
Yeah.
been asked it once, I think. So will there be a top secret cow level? It's a secret.
Why did you choose to keep the isometric 3D view?
Because I think the simplest answer is because it's Diablo 3. And for us, we felt that's the game we wanted to play. That's the game we thought the fans would want to play. And it really fits with keeping the game approachable, exploring that type of gameplay. There's not a ton of isometric action role-playing games out there. It's a very small market. So, where there's lots of other types of, viewpoints and games and, that use other views. So we really felt that, we wanted to stick true to the Diablo series and do it that way.
Merci. Thank you so much, guys, for coming along tonight.